King Philip II of Spain smashed open the doors to his son Don Carlos's bedchamber, not as a father, but as a general orchestrating a siege. He was clad in the imposing armor of a monarch, a harbinger of his impending action. The young prince, heir to one of the most powerful empires on earth, awoke abruptly to find himself surrounded by armed guards, confusion painting his features. In that moment it dawned on Carlos, this was no ordinary lecture or punishment. He was being arrested. The man who had given him life had come to take away his freedom, and the obligations of kingship were about to extinguish a father's love. But how did their relationship devolve to this point? To unravel this tale of betrayal, we must journey back to the very beginning, one marked by both divine miracle and hidden curse. The birth of a prince. The year was 1545, and whispers filled the Spanish royal palace as courtiers eagerly anticipated the arrival of the long-awaited heir. Yet, unbeknownst to the celebrators, concern lurked among the royal physicians, who exchanged anxious glances that hinted at darker realities. This child was born of a bloodline so obsessively kept pure that it had become poisonous. Don Carlos had just 6 great-great-grandparents, unlike the typical 16 that a normal person would have. This startling familial scenario arose from generations of uncles marrying nieces and first cousins, wedding first cousins, all in a foolish attempt to preserve royal blood from the so-called corruption of outsiders. Carlos's family tree had ceased to branch. Instead, it strangled itself through incestuous unions. When he arrived into the world on July 8, 1545, midwives noted a strange shape to his head and a weak cry that was worrisome. However, the fact that he was male was enough for the court's revelry. His mother, Maria Manuela of Portugal, held him for mere minutes, exhausted from a brutal delivery that had taken a toll on her body. A fever swept over her within hours, and while the court celebrated, Maria's skin burned as her life slipped away. 4 days later, the bells that heralded Carlos's birth now tolled for his mother's funeral. Unaware of his profound loss, the swaddled infant paid the price of his existence with the death of the only parental love he would ever know. The legacy of a cursed lineage. Maria was not just Carlos's mother. She was his first cousin. Their fathers were brothers, their mothers sisters. This was not merely a royal marriage. It was a genetic echo chamber. The same blood that had claimed Maria's life now coursed through Carlos's veins, carrying with it centuries of inherited damage. At his mother's funeral, King Philip stood as a grieving widower holding his infant son, but his thoughts spiraled into darker criteria. While courtiers saw hope in Carlos's survival, Philip couldn't escape the fear of what invisible costs were to follow him. The wet nurses began reporting troubling behaviors. The baby's feeding habits were erratic, and he alternated between hours of wailing and eerie silence. One nurse claimed that he stopped breathing entirely for nearly a minute before gasping back to life. Although temporary, these issues were common for newborns. Physicians assured the king that with time, his son would grow strong. They believed that the blood of emperors, which flowed through Carlos, would grant him greatness. They were gravely mistaken. Each generation of intermarriage had forged another link in a chain that had now transformed into an invisible shackling. The famed Habsburg jaw, with its deformity, was merely the external manifestation of deeper, more insidious genetic issues. The curse wasn't supernatural. It was mathematical genetic roulette skewed against the odds. The struggles of youth. Carlos survived his birth a motherless child born into a genetic cage. Yet the curse of his lineage was soon visible to all. At age 13, the royal armorer grew frustrated as he struggled to fit Carlos with a breastplate forged from the finest Milan steel. Measurements revealed a disturbing curvature of his body. The left side of his torso caved inward while the right bore a higher shoulder. No amount of reshaping would accommodate the princely form that defied symmetry. As Carlos stood there, arms outstretched, the armorer noticed how the boy's breathing came in sharp, labored bursts, not due to exertion, but because of a sunken chest that made each breath a battle against his own ribcage. Whispers circulated within the court, though they pretended to ignore the obvious indicators of his genetic malady. Carlos heard them. He could hear the echoes of their hushed judgments rattling against the stone walls. His skull had grown oddly, bulging on one side, resembling a melon left too long in the sun. Portraits demanded increasingly creative angles to disguise what had become grotesquely apparent. Plus, Carlos's left leg, which had not kept pace with the right, forced him to walk with a lurching gait that grated against the marble floors of the palace. In 16th century Spain, the king's physical form was considered a reflection of divine favor. A strong and symmetrical air was seen as a blessing from God himself. But what did Carlos's misshapen body convey about the Habsburg bloodline? What message did it send about Spain itself? Physicians devised elaborate theories to explain Carlos's condition, blaming imbalances in his humors or the alignment of stars at birth, anything but the truth of innumerable generations of interbreeding yielding tragic results. With treatments echoing practices that today would be deemed torturous, Carlos endured agonizing procedures, blood leaden to balance his humors, mercury baths to straighten his spine, and iron boots designed to force his shorter leg to stretch. With each night that the boots came off, his screams echoed throughout the palace corridors, not just from physical pain, but from a deep-seated rage at his own body's betrayal. He had been groomed for greatness. He was destined to rule. The dark descent, yet even beyond the visible deformities, troubling signs were emerging within the prince's mind. His attention seemed to flit constantly from one detail to another, fixating on meaningless minutiae while overlooking vital lessons in diplomacy and governance. On some days, he would speak with the eloquence befitting a royal, only to stutter and stammer on others, appearing lost and confused. The crushing headaches that plagued him bound him to his chambers for days, often resulting in a furious self-punishment as he pounded his warped skull against the walls. When he turned 14, marriage proposals arrived from royal families across Europe, each sending portraits of their daughters, each seeking alliance with the Spanish crown. However, Philip hesitated. How could he present an honest depiction of his son, a future king who struggled to stand straight, who gasped for air, and who could hardly wear armor like a true Spanish prince? The foreign ambassadors returned to their courts, sending coded messages warning of the prince's delicate constitution, careful never to ruffle the feathers of their hosts. The rumors among servants whispered darkly. Some believed the ghost of Maria haunted Carlos's twisted bones, a brutal reminder of the unnatural union that created him. Others claimed the sins of the family's ancestors manifested vividly in his flesh. Every deformity a generational pride made manifest. However, far more ominous than the deformities were the inclinations taking root in his troubled psyche. Carlos's burgeoning sadism became apparent during an ordinary boot fitting. The royal shoemaker, trembling and terrified, presented an essential pair crafted meticulously for the prince. Yet Carlos, feeling discomfort from a pinch in one of the boots, exploded in a rage, demanding the shoemaker cut them to pieces and consume them. The bewildered artist obeyed, tears streaming down his cheeks as he disassembled his hard work and munched on the leather. The court observed, horrified. But what was particularly disturbing was that this incident was just the tip of the iceberg. A descent into darkness, Carlos's fascination with suffering grew. The palace kitchens whispered of the young prince ordering live rabbits to his chambers just to roast them alive, timing how long their screams would last. Servants discovered the charred remains meticulously arranged, resembling grotesque art installations. When a young page laughed at his limp, Carlos took lethal measure. Standing over the boy's bed with a glowing poker, he lost his balance. But the message was clear: mockery would not be tolerated. During a diplomatic meeting with Portuguese dignitaries, Carlos held a knife to an ambassador's throat, demanding recognition of Spanish superiority. However, it was the intelligence behind his cruelty that shocked the court the most. Carlos was no mere madman. He was cunning. He targeted those without power to challenge him, servants, craftsmen, all the while masking his true self in front of high-ranking nobles. Even as the physicians tried to explain his plight, pinning the blame on his imbalanced humors or the pressures of his deformities, whispers of a deeper darkness loomed in the air. Was his madness rooted in physical deformity, or was there something more sinister lurking within his psyche? King Philip desperately sought solutions. He turned to priests for blessings and solicited the finest minds throughout Europe, but nothing seemed effective in stabilizing his son's worsening condition. In truth, the attempts to control his impulses only led to an escalation of Carlos's creativity and cruelty. The palace developed an intricate warning system to alert staff of his footsteps echoing through corridors. When Don Carlos walked close, alarm would spread like wildfire. Chambermaids stopped their duties, kitchen boys hid away, and even guards fled, fearful of the heir whose instability had morphed him into a monster. The final straw. The imminent threat posed by the young prince reached its zenith when a deeply personal humiliation struck at his core. The court's attention fixated on the elegant new queen, Elizabeth of Valois, and admiration swept through the halls. But for Don Carlos, his heart burned with resentment as he regarded her. She was not just someone beautiful who had captured the king's heart. She represented everything stolen from him. Originally promised to Carlos as part of a peaceful alliance between Spain and France, Elizabeth had become the ultimate insult prize snatched from his grasp. Philip had other intentions. Recently widowed, the king needed a queen more than he needed a future for his son. In a grand reversal that stunned the courts of Europe, Philip wedded Elizabeth himself, effectively usurping his son's fortune with precise political calculation. The wedding day was to be a showcase of royal splendor, but for Prince Don Carlos, it only amplified his isolation. As he witnessed their union, joy radiated through the palace, amplifying his internal chaos. For the first time, he had seen a pure reflection of hope, and now that light was extinguished. As Carlos grappled with the depths of his betrayal, the walls of his world closed in. The curse of his bloodline darkened every corner of his existence. His father's actions had acted as final fuel to the flames of his deep-seated fury. The prince's rage, stoked by his sense of betrayal, began to erupt, culminating in the event that would lead to his arrest, a moment crystallized in the annals of history. With an already precarious grip on his sanity, Carlos faced the ultimate humiliation when his father stormed into his chambers, prison guards at the ready. In that fateful encounter, King Philip II delivered a devastating blow, forever severing the bond between father and son. The very fabric of familial loyalty was torn apart by the responsibilities of kingship. Conclusion: the legacy. The chambers remained silent, haunting echoes of betrayal lingering in the air, colored by the struggles of Don Carlos, an heir marked by genetic malady, physical deformity, and the spiritual poison of pride. The young prince went from royal flesh to a mere shadow, unable to escape the bonds of a lineage that promised power but only delivered torment. Carlos became a cautionary tale, a tragic figure swept under the rug of royal history, illustrating how the quest for purity and power could birth insanity. The fate of Don Carlos was sealed by the legacy of the Habsburgs, forever entwined in the darkness of his lineage, serving as a chilling reminder of the destructive nature of intertwined bloodlines and the high cost of ambition. Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to support our work. Never miss an upload. Like this vid, drop a comment, and share it with others to help us grow this historical community.